Enrolling in the Academy is really simple. You'll just go to our website, wblinc.org/academy. And when you get here, you'll see our main page and you can click enroll and it'll take you to this form where you're just gonna fill this out. It'll take you about 5 minutes. Once you submit this, you're enrolled in the Academy and you'll receive an email from me so you can pick the classes you'd like to take and join our Academy family. So we're an after-school program rooted in hip hop. So we have a bunch of classes that you may find interesting. You can go right to our website and go to our classes tab and you'll see some of them, from performing arts like hip hop theater, spoken word, hip hop dance, some of our business classes that are like a boss and walk it like I talk it, which would be more arts management and entrepreneur based. And then we also have things like our music classes, MCing and rapping and beat production and DJing. You can go to wblinc.org/academy to enroll.
Oh, yes, you can. What's going on, good people? My name is Mazi Mutafa. I'm the Executive Director of Words, Beats, and Life. And I am here for episode 23 of No New Leaders, a show that I co-host with my good brother, Reverend Dr. Minister, Jason Nichols. What's going on, Jay?
Nothing much. I'm
you
chilling.
Can't call it. Ain't nothing going on but the rent. It's Sunday.
Exactly. You took the words right out of my mouth.
That's what I'm here for, bro. That's what a good co-host does. I know what you're thinking before you even say it out loud. I definitely appreciate you joining me again for this Sunday edition of No New Leaders. And I wanted to have a conversation that I think is kind of timely. It's still in that leadership space, but I wanted to talk about the role of leaders and the led in promoting innovation. And I think the part of the reason why I'm thinking about this is a couple of reasons. First, this is about to be the 50th anniversary of hip hop culture, and lots of people are celebrating the fact that hip hop has survived for 50 years, mostly talking about the music industry, despite the fact that there really has always been a thriving dance community, always has been a thriving graffiti community, always has been a thriving DJ community, but those things haven't necessarily had the same kind of commercial appeal or the ability to sell through industries that music has. And so there's been less focus on them, but I think that this is an exciting time because, some of the people that are pioneers, many of the pioneers are still alive. And so they're here to see something that they were a part of creating turn 50, while they turn, 60, 70 plus years old. But one of the challenges, at least I've had over the last 21 years, is engaging those pioneers in conversation about kind of current innovation, like staying abreast of what people are doing right now. It's actually one of the most difficult questions for people that I've talked to, at least in the hip hop community, to answer. Like, who are the other people doing this work that we should know about? And it's like, I don't know. I'm just doing my work. You know what I'm saying? So, like, what's the role of leaders and the led in promoting? That's my question to you, Jay. Is my audio not working?
Yeah, bro, it broke up a little bit there. So I'm not exactly. It was like you turn into a robot, and then it was like, "That's my question to you." I was just kind of
This
make
is
up.
so frustrating. I'm literally plugged into our internet so that we can not have this problem.
Well,
So
I hear you loud and clear right now. It was really a brief second.
okay. It was just a question about what's the role of leadership in recognizing and promoting innovation.
I think leaders absolutely do that. I think leadership is really important in, sometimes the leader isn't the person who innovates something. The leader is the person who figures out who is innovating and how to spotlight their work and how to promote their work so that innovation moves the field, discipline, culture forward. And so I think leadership is really important in innovation in that particular way. It's not always the innovator. It's the person who's able to present it to the masses and make sure that it gets the shine that it deserves, the innovation itself, and the innovator. I think a good leader also knows sometimes you have to put the innovator, give the innovator his or her shine as well. So yeah, I think leadership is incredibly important.
So let's see what kind of leader you are. Who are the people that kind of represent innovation in the space of, particularly in the space of hip hop. But if you want to make it about African American studies, I know that's really your primary lane / media / politics. But keeping it in the hip hop context, who are the people that you, when you see that they're doing something, you're like, wow, that's really innovative? Or what are the innovations that you've witnessed, let's just say over the last 20 years? I know you've been rapping longer than 20 years. I know you haven't been rapping a lot lately, but I know that you've been involved in this space for 20 plus years. Who are the people that you think of? And it could be old innovations, doesn't have to be today. Who are the people that you think of when you think about innovation in the space of hip
hop? So the first thing that came to mind, obviously, and it's not even necessarily over the last 20 years. When I think of innovation in hip hop, I think about the technological innovations that started, way back with figuring out DJ mixers and all of that. That's the first kind of innovation that comes to my mind when I think about hip hop innovation, is the actual, technological movement forward that drove the culture. The putting two, record players side by side. I know, they did that in disco sometimes, but some of the innovations that we saw from such young people that probably, could have been working at Lockheed, but instead were, working class and poor urban people, oftentimes not getting the best education, and yet they were figuring things out. So that's the first form of innovation. When I think of like innovating things stylistically, with me being an MC, me being a rapper, like I look at the big jumps in lyricism, with Kool Moe Dee being the first, like, that I think took rap from, that one, kind of like party chants to like just lyrical, a lyrical style of rap. And then, you go into LL Cool J with his battle style, and then, Rakim bringing us into kind of a modern era, and Nas taking that to another level. And there's also when I look at innovations and looking at people who moved the culture. I don't know if it's always a move forward, but it's certainly a move. I have to give a little bit of props to my doppelganger. I mean, he's somebody we've debated about, and I don't always think about positively, but that's someone who changed the sound of hip hop altogether, the sound of rap music. Brought about that kind of, with 808s and heartbreaks, like really changed the sound. Even brought about a little bit of that auto-tune sound that we hear a lot in music even now. So I mean, I think there have been so many innovations throughout hip hop that have, shifted the culture, and that's why the culture, hasn't gone the route of, blues or even jazz or even rock and roll, where it had its moment and then it kind of, in terms of the music, that is, it had its moment in the sun and it's still around, but it's more avant-garde. Like, it's still at the top of pop culture because of its ability to shift and change, and the regional innovations. Like, I think about the way DC artists have incorporated a DC sound and a go-go sound, and the way New Orleans people bring their bounce into their hip hop, and people in the Midwest with that Bone Thugs and Harmony, rapid fire kind of style, in LA. So I think and of course, Houston with the screwed up style. So I think we've seen so many different innovations that happen in real time that have changed the culture. And that's what I think keeps it at the forefront of popular culture.
I'm so glad I let you finish, because I was going to interrupt you earlier and be like, please don't make all your comments about rap music. But I let you finish all those comments about rap music, because it's so interesting, like how, and I get it, because that's your element. I just think it's so weird that like even people that know and love hip hop as a culture still focus on rap music so heavily. Like, and this isn't a, you don't have to defend yourself.
No, no, no.
It's
I'm
not
not
because
going to defend myself. I
Go
just
ahead.
want to say one thing. I think rap music is one element of hip hop culture where is one element of hip hop culture where it's not all about nostalgia. Like it actually moves forward. You know what I mean? To the next style. Whereas with graffiti, with certain forms of dance and b-boying, like it gets nostalgic. Yeah, you could disagree. I'm just saying it gets
I'm gonna
very
disagree. I'm gonna let you finish, and I'm gonna disagree.
cool. That's pretty much what you do. So I think a lot of it, a lot of that gets very, thinking about those were the good old days, and those were the times when it was pure, and those were the times when it was better. And they have a reverence for their innovators. And hip and rap music oftentimes is moving on to something new or a new sound or something like that.
So the reason why I disagree is number one, I'm sitting in a space where we have turntables, right? These are the old school. Oh, you can't see it. Well, you can see it over there. This is a Technique 1200. This is kind of like the grandfather of all turntables, right? And then I'm
Yeah.
sitting here next to this Rain 12, which kind of imitates that machine, but is an innovation. Like it doesn't have a toner arm. You don't actually need wax because it's got this thing. Like the technology is still innovating, right? And then a little bit further over, we've got controllers. So there's literally technological innovations that are continuing to happen. This mixer that I'm sitting in front of is like one of the most current mixers and lets you do all kinds of things with music, regardless of genre, that are different than the mixer that's just off screen. That's like the most basic mixer you could possibly get. So there's technological innovation, right? But then if you talk about graffiti, there are documentaries you could watch. Like there's a documentary called Name Writing, where it's about the first graffiti writers who literally just went out and did straight tags. So to go from those straight tags to the kind of to go from straight tags to 3D graffiti to wild style to calligraphy, like innovations happening all the time, all over the world, from people using spray cans to using paint rollers to using markers, all kinds of innovations happening in the graffiti space in terms of who's doing it, what they're depicting, what the messages are, and what tools they're using. To the point that there are now multiple companies that exist for the creation of graffiti art, creating the cans and the tools that people use. So lots of technological innovation there as well. Breaking is going to be in the Olympics this year in France. That's an innovation, bro, because the reality is that breaking is big enough that it doesn't look like Crush Groove. It doesn't look like Wild Style. It doesn't look like what we grew up. It doesn't look like me on my mama's linoleum floor kitchen doing a backspin. It looks like gymnastics in a lot of ways. And there's a great deal of resistance in the breaking community to this idea of breaking becoming a sport as opposed to being a dance. But the innovation is happening. It's been happening the entire time. It just hasn't been happening with the bright spotlights of media saying, hey, everybody, look over here at this thing. So that's the first thing. So that's one place where there's innovation happening. But so I want to just, but then there's the other part of hip hop that you're a part of, which is that fifth element. As a scholar, having done your PhD dissertation on hip hop dance, you ain't messing with my Dougie. So this idea of creating academic spaces where hip hop is interrogated, celebrated, archived, that's an innovation too. All the books that have been written. So like there's constant, and a lot of that isn't necessarily nostalgic. I to be honest, I didn't read your dissertation, but I would assume it wasn't just about older dances at that time. The Dougie had just come out, so it was about contemporary dance and what was happening in communities and how that was an expression of masculinity in that moment. It was a snapshot of a moment in time. And so I say that to say, I know you want to jump in, and sometimes our disagreements are artificial, and I think this is one of those examples, but I'm saying this to say that there are people that are not what you just did or what I just did. They're just talking about 1987 and blah, 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 blah. And so like this to me is where younger folks in hip hop, younger than, we are younger folks in hip hop, but younger folks than us have a responsibility to be thinking about what is the real power and potential of this culture. What are the real innovations that can occur? Like, I'm not sure if you're aware. I think it'd be great if you could Google this. I'm gonna take you off screen so you can Google something real quick. So there is like I said that I'm gonna push you all the way on screen. There's a group based out of Seattle that established health and wellness as, I think the number is 13, the 13th element of hip hop. If you Googled hip hop and health and wellness, an official element of hip hop, or whatever search engine you use, you'd be able to see this organization. And one of the things about them is that they, so most people who are super involved in hip hop know that there are 5 core elements: emceeing, DJing, breaking, graffiti, and knowledge of self. Are you looking this up, Jason?
Yeah, I see something.
Okay, so people know those 5 basic elements, but then those folks also know things like beatboxing, know things like entrepreneurialism and fashion and language, things that were added, innovations by folks like KRS-One, who promoted additional elements. And so that hip hop as a practical global youth and adult culture has been adding to itself over time. That health and wellness becoming, I want to say it's either the 13th or the 14th element, because to be honest, we only focus on the first 5 and then kind of other innovations in the space. But the idea that people got together as community and said, health and wellness has to be a part of culture if it's going to survive, if it's going to thrive, if it's going to actually help communities to prosper. And I think that is another example of innovation, the theoretical innovation of hip hop. Did you find it, Jay?
Is this the thing, founded by Dougie Fresh and Dr. Olajuwon?
Well, let's do this. Let me let you jump in with how you want to jump in. I'm going to find it. So why don't you go ahead and jump in how you wanted to respond earlier to me talking my talk.
So no, I mean, I agree with much of what you said. And it wasn't my intention to say that people aren't driving hip hop forward in many different realms other than just music. That wasn't what I was saying. I think there is a reverence for, and I guess this happens everywhere, but there is a reverence for the past amongst the other elements more so than music. And when you talked about like DJ equipment changing, I always wonder, is that an innovation made by hip hop or made by the capitalist culture industry that wants to profit off of hip hop, and not just hip hop. I mean, because I remember when Serato came out, like that was like a big deal. DJs didn't have to carry vinyl. And I remember there were DJs who were like, nah, I'm still carrying my vinyl. And then they were like, yo, my back hurts. And, they like, it started coming off the laptop. And it was a big change in hip hop. And we've seen again, I wonder how much of that is like coming from to me, that's a little different than, somebody in his mama's living room plugging up DJ mixers differently to achieve something different than, I think that's really different than like the culture industry saying, hey, there are DJs all over the world doing this. Let's find a way to make it more convenient. And those people may or may not have anything to do with hip hop.
So a couple of things. I found the group I was talking about. It's actually called Hip Hop is Green. They're based out of Seattle. They're actually a vegan organization. So for them, health and wellness has to do with veganism, which is cool. I eat vegan food. I enjoy it a lot. And it was the 10th element. They said that health and wellness is the 10th element of hip hop. They actually got a bunch of different hip hop artists to come in and certify that they agreed with that idea. But to your point, right? So like those early DJs, the earliest DJs, they didn't have a crossfader. They didn't have the literal ability to go back and forth between the two
Right.
sets of turntables. So like literally the people that created the technology created the ability to do that. And so I hear you in terms of, is that kind of technological innovation the same as those pioneers who are creating culture out of what they have? And I'm careful not to say culture out of nothing, because they actually had something. This is part of the mythology of hip hop, that the pioneers were these kind of mostly men who forged a way out of no way and created something out of nothing. And I got a chance, I always talk about this every time I get a chance to talk about old school hip hop. I got a chance to see a scholar do a presentation of a paper at a conference in California called Show and Prove. And the paper was about the hidden figures of hip hop, which were the mothers of the early DJs. That Africa Bambaataa borrowed his mother's records to take them out to the park jam. Part of the reason why he had an eclectic taste in music is because his mama had an eclectic taste in music. And when he would borrow records, he'd have to write her name on them because he'd have to return them after the park jam. That Kool Herc's father was integrally involved in the music community in Jamaica. And so like these folks didn't develop these interests out of no place. And it's not to take away from them as innovators or pioneers or creators, but it is to say that their parents had an influence on the people that they would become. Just like those industries that saw what they were doing, created whole industries around trying to meet the needs of these young people creating art and culture. So like the people that started MTN or Montana Paint were graffiti writers who didn't want to keep using Rust-Oleum, which is just standard paint for like if you got a rusty bike to paint it red, using that same paint, and didn't want people to have to keep stealing caps from other kinds of spraying products like glue or whatever. They actually made caps for the graffiti community. And those folks actually came from the graffiti community and were trying to meet a need of their fellow writers, right? This could be a great paper to investigate. Who are those musical engineers that are developing the new equipment? And what role are the DJs, are the engineers, are the producers playing in helping guide and direct what it is that's being created? Because it's not as though the idea of Serato of digitizing music to put it on a laptop would have been driven by an engineer sitting in the studio. There were probably people going to clubs and be like, why do you carry all those records? And they're like, well, I need to be able to bring all this music. Now suddenly music's digital. Why don't you put it on a computer instead of in a crate? Oh, okay. And so how do we replicate this kind of culture of crate digging? If you've ever been in Serato or a DJ program, it's still sorted into crates. They're called folders, but they're building on the idea of crates. So even the technological innovations are mirrors of what it is that people are actually doing with the tools. But that's just for the music piece, right? But I asked this question. Go ahead.
I just want to say with the whole crate thing, it's interesting. One of the things that I always think about is like there was a point where, you know, most people didn't use vinyl, they used CDs, right? And they had come up with the CD decks. I don't know if you remember those.
Yeah, they're called CDJs.
Yeah, CDJs, exactly. And those, like if a DJ came in at one point and they were using CDJs, like I remember the DJs that I knew and that I was close to, like really turned their nose up at that.
Yep.
Like they thought that was just like, you know, fake, and also because you didn't necessarily, it made the technology made it easy that it wasn't the same art form. That, at least this is my understanding of their position, was, you know, it took a long time to become a DJ. Like it was a skill you had to learn, and the technology had taken a little bit of the skill out of it. Like it's almost like dynamiting a lake and getting fish to turn up rather than having to go out and actually fish.
But let's call that part of what it is. Part of what that is also misogyny, because that CDJ was actually lighter, didn't require you to have a crew to help you carry all your records into the space. Like this controller that I'm holding is a replication of this. It's two turntables with a crossfader that I can carry in one hand. You know what this means? It means that if you're a person that might not have the same level of upper body strength, you can now suddenly be a DJ. You can now suddenly book gigs. You don't need a crew to be able to move into the space. And yes, the technology does make it easier. But why is easier easier. You still got to know music. You still got to learn about what goes well together. It still requires some study. Now, does that mean that there are going to be people who can come up in a space and be a DJ that aren't necessarily prepared to do the things a DJ does? Yes, it does mean that. But that's where the marketplace matters. People being able to say, who are really the people that know music, that can create a groove, that can blend and mix things that I would have never thought could go together. That's where the artistry of being a DJ comes in. Access to the technology is the beginning. But to actually be able to create, to use the turntable or use the controller as an instrument still requires skill, still requires study, still requires practice. The only thing it doesn't require is for you to have upper body strength to carry crates of records and break your back to be able to take stuff upstairs, downstairs, wherever. It doesn't require, so like that's a part of the democratizing of DJing, giving more people access. Like the controller I held up, it's cost maybe $150. This turntable costs $1,200. This one, there's two of them, plus a $2,000 mixer in the middle. Like it's elite equipment, but it's also for people who have access to resources. That ain't everybody. Almost everybody watching this could afford a controller to get started. And there's apps on your phone that you could download to be able to start working on simulated turntables. This is like, of course, there are purists that are going to be opposed to that. But those purists are opposed for some. I mean, frankly, I think some of those purists are opposed to it for the reason you said, which is everybody can get access. But I think it's often because of who's getting access and resentment about the ability of, frankly, women DJs to be in greater demand because there's fewer of them. Like women in a hip hop space, there's always been this discussion and debate around misogyny in hip hop because it's definitely there in the music, but it's also there in those attitudes. It's also there. It's kind of embedded in the fact that this thing costs what it costs and weighs what it weighs, that it's going to prevent some people from being able to access it, right? But it's also a matter of saying almost all of the women DJs I know that are actually really good are in way more demand than the men that I know, because people want to be able to lift up the abilities of women to be not just tokens or just given a space but like to be really dope women who can come into a space and do all those same things that a guy does, but with a different kind of sensibility, with a different kind of energy, with a different kind of intention. And I think that more women in hip hop is an innovation that's really important, not just as witnesses and as fans, but as practitioners, as creators, as promoters. Go ahead.
Yeah, I definitely hear that, and honestly, I never thought of it that way about the misogyny and making it easier for women to get into the game. I think in terms of the cost, I think some of that is about like the proverbial paying your dues, or like the fact that you are really invested in being a DJ means you actually made an investment. I don't think it's people who had tons of resources. A lot of the DJs that I know didn't have tons of resources. It was like, I am going to invest whatever little resources I'm going to save up for 3 months or 6 months or a year in order to get this equipment. Then I'm going to master it and all of that, versus, somebody who is like, yeah, I got $150. I'm going to start DJing. And a lot of those people, because it was such a small investment, also undercut a lot of the DJs who had the equipment, who put in the time, who did that. They'd be like, yeah, I'll DJ your party for $50. Whereas somebody else was like, yo, I need like real money to DJ this party. So I think that was also part of the complaint. I'd never heard anybody say, and again, that's not how misogyny or racism works or any other kind of ism, but I never heard anybody express, and that's not to say that it doesn't exist. I'm just saying I've never heard it where someone was like, man, I'm sick of all these women DJs who are able to carry these light CDJs. They should have to carry big, heavy equipment. That wasn't, I'm not saying that's not a reason. That's just something that I've never heard.
Yeah, let me just jump in real quick, because I think one of the unspoken elements of hip hop culture is theft. So like a lot of those cats that got those turntables early on stole them. They didn't save up a bunch of money. They stole them from stores. The same thing is true for graffiti writers. Like there was a period of time in graffiti history where if you paid for paint, you were a herb. You had to steal your paint. Stealing was a part of the process. Right. And the reality is that even the idea of stealing samples, theft, taking actual property and intellectual property was definitely a part of the early decades.
But not stealing lyrics. You couldn't steal lyrics. that was something that was really frowned upon. I don't want nobody sounding like me on no album. You know?
Yeah, I mean, I hear that, but I'm also thinking about like
material.
There's definitely, you know, this idea of sampling makes it different, but there are definitely plenty of lyrical references that were not written by the authors that come from other things. Like I was literally watching the NFL today, and Method Man had a line like he ended a line by saying, you know, I'm a menace, hurry up and buy. So like he's making a reference to the movie Menace to Society where the woman says hurry. So like this idea of pulling cultural references, things that people understand, media or film that people have in common, even like the skits on things. I get your point, but I am saying it's not true in the purest sense that people have always sampled, borrowed, stole.
Well, hip hop
in ways that were blatant and ways not so blatant. What'd you say?
I was just gonna say hip hop is built off of innovation, but not necessarily creation. You know, hip hop didn't create the turntable. You know what I mean? They didn't create the mixer. Like these were things that they just repurposed. So, you know, lyrically, guys did that. The producers who made beats, they took beats and put them in a different context. Sometimes, like, you know, once people got around to like, you got the SP12 and people started chopping it up and reordering and reconfiguring, you know, their samples. That's kind of what hip hop is built on. Not necessarily creating something, but, you know, reimagining, repurposing, and innovating is kind of what, you know, what it's all about.
No, but your Grandmaster Caz said that in this documentary about global hip hop. He said hip hop didn't create anything, but it recreated everything. So I wanted to have this conversation in part because I wanted to originally have Patrick Washington, the director of poetry at Words, Beats, and Life, on to talk about an event we just hosted yesterday called the Combines. And the Combines is one of our innovations. Like, and I think that the reason why I'm personally stuck on innovation and pointing out innovation, because I feel like even the innovations we've been a part of that aren't necessarily super well known, because we're not super well known, are important. Like this idea of the creation of Bum Rush the Boards, which was the world's first hip hop chess tournament that included the creation of a mixtape. That now we're getting ready to start producing chess boards that are hip hop inspired. That other people have done that, but ours, to be frank, look a lot better. So this idea of the Combines was really rooted in listening to members of the poetry community. Words, Beats, and Life does a bunch of work in the slam space, which is a kind of competition-based poetry. And I think there's a lot of problems with slam. Most of which are that adults, for some reason, really celebrate young people's trauma. And so because of that, young people create more art that reflects that trauma. It's kind of like, and I said this to some young people the other day, it's that line from the interview with 50 Cent where someone asked him, how come you don't talk about your relationship with your son? He said, people don't want to hear that from me. And a lot of younger artists, even outside of hip hop, young poets, feel like the things that matter to them that are not traumatic don't matter to judges. And so they're thinking about how the crowd is going to respond to what it is they have to say, not just the fact that they have the ability that is really not common in America. Even though we live in a place that promotes free speech, most people's speech is not heard by anyone that isn't their immediate family or their immediate coworker. So this idea of going into spaces where there's audiences of people that are convened to hear you is not most people's experience. And so young people, more often than not, are celebrated when they talk about things like being a rape survivor or being a survivor of abuse from a parent or dealing with an eating disorder, as opposed to, you know, being a lover of various kinds of makeup, you know, things that would be thought of as frivolous. Things like love. Love poets are usually not celebrated in things like slam, unless it's like love of, I don't know, revolution or something, right? No, seriously, because like it'd be a lot of young poets talking about revolution. I'm like, did you read that speech where Malcolm said, "Don't talk about revolution unless you're prepared to eat rats while we get ready to go to brunch"? So we wanted to create this thing that, one, didn't celebrate trauma, two, had cash prizes connected to it, so young people wouldn't just be performing for a title, but would actually get some financial benefit from it. From their skills, their ability to tell stories and to paint pictures with their words. Three, that we didn't want to do slam or just kind of open mic. We actually wanted to challenge them to write towards literary form. So like we had things like a head-to-head haiku challenge. We had this thing called on-the-spot stanzas, where you'd be given a book about anything, and your job was to perform what's written in that book in a way that's poetic or performative, right? We had OPP, which is, in the hip-hop context, other people's but for us, it was other people's poetry, and in that they had to perform something from memory, whether it was a speech, whether it was somebody else's poetry, but they had to perform something from memory. So it's, again, testing another skill. We did have a freestyle component, where it's freestyle poetry versus freestyle MCs, which was dope. And then we imported something from Canada called a compliment battle. So instead of spending time tearing each other down, the competitors had to actually go head to head to build someone up. And just like the combines, like everything except for the head-to-head stanzas, head-to-head haikus and the compliment battle, you actually weren't competing against someone else. You were just competing for scores, kind of like you're competing against the clock in the combines. So it's competition, but it's not direct competition. It's really about competition of skill, not beating someone else. It's being your best. And I wanted to talk about it in part because, as Patrick Washington said from the stage last night, we've been talking about this for 2 years, 2 years about how to change the culture of youth and adult poetry. And we didn't know if it was going to work. We didn't know if people would sign up. And I'm not even going to lie. If I had any hair, I would have lost some in the weeks leading up to this because it looked like nobody was going to respond at first. In the end, we had about 30 competitors who spent an entire day with us performing to get to the finals. And I'm giving all this granular detail in part because I feel like one of the things that has to be a priority for leadership in the hip hop space is to not just replicate kind of larger white institutions and hip hopnotize them, but to actually create different things. So like right now, there's a big push, respectfully, to create kind of archives to document hip hop in communities all over the world, which I think is great in a lot of ways. But how is that archive different than the National Archives here in Washington, D.C.? Because that archive, the D.C. one, really just exists for tourists and to literally preserve old documents.
Yeah.
It's not making
that.
What'd you say?
I said, and they're not doing a great job of it.
But last thing. But the point there is that like replicating white institutions to kind of make them hip hop, if it's not transformed, if the institution that's being created isn't transforming the larger community, it's not hip hop. It's just something that's been adopted but not remixed, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I definitely hear that, and I love the way you guys changed. I'm not, as you know, because I understand the trauma piece as well. That's part of what I think, was my problem with spoken word poetry. I was never a fan of it because it seemed kind of stale, and it seemed like a lot of people were doing a lot of the same things. Whereas when I heard people rap, everybody sounded different. There was always, everyone had their own distinct sound, even if it was just their voice. A lot of times it was stylistically what they were rapping about. It just felt different. But when I would go and hear people do poetry, and even I think some of the new MC battles with no beat are kind of basically spoken word poetry battles. I just never have been a huge fan of that. I think it's harder to have to ride a beat. You don't know what beat is coming on and all that. You have to find a way to entertain on a particular beat. But yet, the way you described that event, I wanted to attend. You know what I mean? Like, I'd like to see a compliment battle. That would be really interesting. I'd love to see, you know, a lot of it just sounded like an oratory contest, which I took part in when I was in high school. Um, should have won. I'm still a little salty, but you know, you had to write a speech and on a particular topic and deliver the speech, and it had to be researched and all that. And when we did it in middle school at my school, we had to, you know, give someone else's speech. And I remember I did like a Frederick Douglass speech, and it was, you know, I think it's really good to practice those kinds of skills, because those are actually life skills. You know, I think those actually help you in many different realms. So I would love to attend something like that. To me, that just puts a whole new and you know, shout out to Patrick, because I love Patrick. He's one of the spoken word poets that I actually like enjoy listening to. Like he's somebody who I've seen perform a few times, and every time I'm like interested in what he has to say. But and sometimes, you know, he's comical, and other times he's like, you know, he can be serious. Sometimes he does talk trauma. But every time that I've listened to him, I've left not knowing what's coming. And with most spoken word poets, it's like, all right, I know what's coming. I know the cadence. I know everything that's about to happen. And to hear that you guys remix that, I think really, really makes it interesting for people who like me, who wouldn't normally be a fan. If I hear spoken word competition, I'm like, okay, trauma, same cadence, somebody who probably should be in therapy but thinks this is going to heal them rather than just actually going and getting professional help.
Which is kind of interesting, right? Because so a couple of things I didn't say, which is one of the other things we decided to do was to have a JV versus varsity, so we could bring in kind of seasoned poets and MCs and up and coming, so to have those youth and adults in the same space, which I think is really important for us if we're talking about community. Like, we can't just pour all of our resources and innovation into the future of youth, because adults are still here. They can still do things that are different. And so one of the things that I love about what happened yesterday was watching how people responded on social media to the poets and the MCs that went, saying, you know, I came in second, and they're walking around with their medals. Like, I didn't win any money, I got these medals, but I got to kind of flex in a way that I've never been allowed to flex at an open mic. I've never, they got to, and coming to watch each other. Like, a lot of times poets come into open mics, they perform and they leave because they're like, I don't want to be influenced. But having them be there the whole day and watch each other and celebrate each other is a part of how we build community. And so I'm bringing this up in part because I feel like this kind of innovation is happening in the breaking space. There's a competition called Silverback that tours all over the country, where there is a first, second, and third place prize, whereas most jams, including the ones we host, only have a first place prize. So being able to pay b-boys and pay them well, because they had sponsorship from Monster Energy. But thinking about the role that money plays in dismantling the idea of starving artists somehow being better than artists that are well taken care of. The Red Bull BC1 is a global competition of breaking that's filled with dance innovation. And the money makes it possible that people are able to go and compete and leave with cash and titles and go out to teach and be, and et cetera, et cetera. So like that, as we think about culture, as we think about community, we have to also be thinking about commerce, not necessarily for the purpose of exploitation. Like I feel like earlier you were talking about, well, that innovation doesn't count because it wasn't done by a DJ, him or herself. I know you didn't say those words, but like this idea that people who are invested in DJing, who are invested in breaking, who are invested in poetry, can't just replicate what they've seen work. Like, Love Jones was a great movie. Surprisingly, none of the young people who are currently our poet laureates or slam teams have ever even heard of the movie. And it's like, you never heard of Love Jones? So it's a great movie, and great for a particular moment in time. But it's kind of like there was an article, I think it was written in the City Paper, the Washington City Paper, about 50 Cent called I think it was called 50 Cent Selling Gangster Rap 10 Years Past Its Prime or something like that. That this idea that if you can get people to show up to an open mic, they're still willing to consume it. So we should still produce it versus we should be challenging audiences. We should be, so even we had a trivia component of the event where the audience had to answer the trivia questions. And so like there's an audience engagement. We had a hosting, I didn't mention this. We had each of the different disciplines had 2 hosts, and the hosts were competing to win the hosting challenge, because hosting is a part of creating those spaces. And so at the very end, the finals audience selected who were of the 2 hosts that got selected in the prelims, which of the 2 was the best host for the evening. So then there's another level of audience engagement, thinking about the role of the people that are witnesses. It's like one of my favorite things to say is when we talk about the cipher, the cipher in a hip hop context is a circle of people. Well, it doesn't just have to be that. It can just be 2 people or some set of people going back and forth. But I like to describe the cipher as a sacred circle of interconnectedness, that the people that are the circle are literally the cipher versus the people at the center are the performers. And so I say that to say the audience has a role. It's not just witness, it is active participant. And that active participation can be boos, it could be cheers, it can be it could be whoa. But they're engaging with what's happening. They're not just watching it. And so thinking about what's the role of the audience at the open mic, at the slam, at the competition where words are being shared, what is the role of the audience? And so we're trying to try to push how the audience, and it's not that that's so innovative, but it's innovative in this space. Thinking about what's the role of the host? How does he, she, or they actually impact the experience of the things that you're there to witness and to celebrate those people?
Yeah, no, I think that's a noble goal, and that's something that needs to be done. People need to celebrate, and I love the piece. One of the things that has made me a WBL ambassador, emissary, fan for a really long time is that WBL has endeavored to pay artists for their art. And guys that would, perhaps be working at Walmart or Starbucks, not using their art, having to use their free time in order to learn and perfect their art, are now valued for their art and able to sometimes, make somewhat of a living off of doing their art by teaching art to other people. And I think that is one of the great contributions that WBL has made, is, allowing for a lot of artists, DJs, poets, rappers, artists, graffiti artists, visual artists, like allowing for them to make a living off of their art. And I think that is something that should happen in every city. There should be something for that, particularly for, when you have the high art, low art divide. If you go to like a lot of, I remember I went to an art store in Western Maryland, and it was like a black art store, and it was, it was owned by this white lady, but they had all this art created by black artists from around the country. And, all of the art was pricey. You know what I mean? It was like super pricey. And it was, really, really dope art. I'm not exactly an aficionado, but from my aesthetic, it was aesthetically pleasing to me. When I think about the art there, it was all what I think many people will call high art, and a lot of people have put hip hop related art in a different category. And you've changed. You're saying that's changing with the respect that dancers are getting and other practitioners and artists are getting now. But it was really dope. It's really dope that a graffiti artist, not named Samo, is getting that kind of respect where they can actually make a living off of their art. And I think that's really important.
I mean, we can think about festivals that exist because of graffiti artists all around the country. I was in Atlanta a couple weeks ago. There's this huge public art, some of which is graffiti, some of which is mural based, some of which is street art, all over the city. Thinking about things like Art Basel and the whole idea that there's a graffiti museum in Miami, started by graffiti writers from New York. There's a desire to celebrate the people that created, who are creating, and innovated within this space and are still acting to innovate. Like, we're getting ready to publish an interview with a really important graffiti writer named Mayor, and he's actually moved out of the paint space. He's now doing sculptures. There's actually right here in the corner behind me is a small version of one of his sculptures that now he's doing kind of life-size versions on the street. So there's street installations of sculptures that are actually breakers, like dancers in various positions. And so we're seeing even the people that started out painting on a train being able to take their art to a different space. I'm gonna go grab the sculpture while Jason talks just for a quick second.
Yeah, I mean, shout out to Mayor, one of the really important original or early, I can't say original, but early graffiti writers in at least the early 80s. And one of his sculptures that I think many people have seen was that he created the BET Award.
Exactly.
So when you see the BET Award, that's actually a creation by Mayor. Shout out to Carlos.
Yeah, and we had the privilege to be able to travel with him abroad. So this is just this is a small version of one of his sculptures, but this is innovation in the space, right? There are people doing lyrical mapping, tracking when particular words entered into the hip hop lexicon and from where, what neighborhood, what city, what community, what artist. There's a lot of people who really take this seriously and are doing things that are below the radar of rap music. It's not what's on the radio. Nobody's interviewing them. And I forgot there's only two other things I forgot to mention about the combines. One, that the judges for each of the rounds were kind of poetry and rap pioneers in DC. Well, actually, the judges for the preliminary rounds were all poetry pioneers in DC. But the judges for the finals were all kind of local legends. So Rock was a judge. Odyssey was a judge. Substantial was a judge. An up-and-coming artist from PG County named O-Slice was a judge. And we were supposed to have Nonchalant. Unfortunately, she had an injury that prevented her from coming. But there were going to be 3 women judges, 2 men, all from this area, all MCs, judging this kind of literary decathlon. So bridging this divide between rap music and poetry, like trying to do several things with the same event. And one of the things that people said, like I had poets come up and say, this is what I heard Freestyle Union was like. This is what I heard it was like in DC in the mid 90s. That we were able to recreate that space by having, the blessings of the OGs and their involvement and the up and comings and the young people all in the same space to be able to just demonstrate mastery of skills. Not really there to beat nobody, but just there to do your best. We need more of that. We need more of that in terms of the way we think about the academy, the way we think about classrooms and communities, that we need people to be reimagining how we build the things we need. You know what I'm saying?
It's funny that when you mention like dance, because first of all, when I think about what you're imagining here for the poets, it kind of makes me think of like golf. You're playing against the course, and you're playing against your own best, but the competition is in the background. You recognize that there is competition, but more than anything, you're playing your best game and seeing where you fall. It's not a one-on-one competition. It's not like tennis or wrestling. It's more I'm playing against what I'm trying to perform the best I can. And when you were mentioning dance, that being something, people saying dance versus competition or sport, when you look at gymnastics, particularly for the women, there's always been like this kind of dance mixed in with competition, particularly with the floor routines. That's basically what it is. It's just now this is men getting an opportunity to do their own floor routine. Obviously different, but the line between dance and competition, there's always been dance competitions. And I think that's a sport. There are people who say ballroom dancing is a sport. So I don't necessarily think that, that you can't, like, it's not dance if it also involves competition in sport.
You know what?
Leading, all these things are now evolved into being competitive sports.
You know what I love is that, and I know you just said this, maybe you misspoke, but I love the fact that you said now this is floor competition for men. What I loved about the competition is it was overwhelmingly gender balanced, that there are multiple competitions. There were women against women or man against woman in the finals. And so like that we saw balance on the final stage. We saw balance in the judging. We saw balance in the audience, that it wasn't, for lack of a better term, a sausage fest on the stage or in the audience.
Let me clarify. I wasn't.
Don't clarify. I know you just misspoke. It's okay. You don't have to.
Yeah. I kind of misspoke. Didn't really. I mean, what I was saying is that's not to say that the b-boying and b-girling won't involve, there won't be women in that. I'm just saying floor routines, men don't do them in the Olympics. Only women.
I got you.
Floor routines.
You're right. I'm sorry. When you said that, when you said the floor routine for men, I thought you were talking about the combine. You were actually talking about breaking.
Yeah, I was talking about the breaking, but yeah.
Cool. So thank you for clearing that up.
Yeah.
Well, I just want to talk about it mostly because I'm super proud of the idea that that basically 4 men put together something that felt like community for everybody, celebrating the accomplishments of men and women and non-gender conforming folks, that everybody was welcome, everybody was celebrated, and everybody used themselves as their own measuring stick. But in the end, we're actually competing to win something other than bragging rights, to actually enrich their lives and have their skill be of use or usefulness to advancing things that mattered outside of that creative space.
Mm-hmm.
Jay, I want to thank you for joining me and for listening to me rant and rave for most of this hour. You good though, bro?
Yeah, man. I've been listening to you rant and rave for 25 years now. So, and I've enjoyed I won't say that. I've enjoyed most moments of it. And I hope, we got another 25 or 50 years in us. So
no doubt.
Much respect.
Respect, babe. All right, everybody. That is episode 23 of No New Leaders, talking about innovation, particularly in the hip hop space. Hopefully this was helpful for some folks. Please feel free to share this, follow and subscribe. Thank you to the folks that watch this live, and thank you to the people that will watch this later. We're just doing the best we can to innovate and create and challenge ourselves and challenge our community to be better, to be healthier. We started off talking about health and wellness. If we are a culture and a community that's not promoting health and wellness, we're not going to last. We can't be promoting death and destruction. Health and wellness in 2023. Peace, y'all.
Ideas, they shake you out of your sleep like when a toddler creeps. Totality of the deep, the mere thought of an unconscious manifestation carried out with the beat. Positive charged protons creating neural explosions. Time hiccups when fingers and pads touch. Dead air smiles because it knows what's coming. The countenance of the clock claps hands. The choreography of the knock slaps jams, and you be like, who made this? Vertebrae responding to the call so bad they make a B-girl curve the wall.